Yeah, so
Good.
welcome to a stream and event and whatnot. Are you hiding? Okay, let me see. So yeah, welcome to an event of interactive storytelling with Laurie. I still not used with her.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Yes.
So yeah, she's Laurie.
Hi.
So yeah, she will tell us about storytelling and stuff.
Yay! Hi everybody, I'm Laurie. Hi. I've seen some of you before, met some of you before, and some of you I don't know who you are, and I will hopefully by the end of the day at least have heard your name, if not memorized it. Probably won't memorize it. Just a bit of background on me. I've been a storyteller my whole life, you know. I wrote my first story age 6. It was about a Christmas elf that had leprosy, because I read the Bible a lot as a kid, and that was like, you know. And then he fixed himself by eating the magic dust that helped the reindeer fly. You know, it's always been kind of that kind of dark fantasy thing that I go for. I got into interaction design originally in 2012, thereafter. I'd been building websites and things like that since the mid to late 90s. In the way that you can build websites using AOL and Angel Fire and things like that. So I had some idea of how to do storytelling through basic interaction and basic HTML from the mid to late 90s. And then in 2012, I moved to Texas and got a job as a, how did they put it? An instructional designer. I was developing safety training courses, computer-based training courses for the oil and gas industry. Oh, I see a raised hand here. Okay.
We have something in common.
Oh, excellent. We'll talk about that later. So, well, sorry, just to lay a bit of groundwork before I really go into the whole narrative thing. Being that this is a talk on interactive storytelling, I'm going to try to be interactive tonight. I didn't prep a PowerPoint. I did prep notes. I do know what I'm going to say, mostly, because it depends in part on you guys, you ladies, you folks, you gender-neutral lovely beings. So I've got a whiteboard here. I don't have a whiteboard marker, though, so... Oh.
Maybe. Is it working?
We'll find out. Hey, let's see. Excellent. Now I have to hope that one of the erasers works. There we go. Okay, so I will be talking to you guys, shifting to this side of the board because of the limits of the camera. Actually, can you still... I care about the people more than... I care about you too, and you too. But yes, so when I ask questions, it's going to be kind of a brainstorming thing as we talk through some of this stuff. Jumping back to 2012, I started working in a program where it was essentially interaction design. And it was interaction design combined with adult learning methodologies, combined with graphic design and video editing and script editing and all sorts of things to get to a point where I could use online interactions to not just encourage people to click things, but to help those things stick with them. And it gave me a real passion both for visual design as well as the importance of blending form and function. Function is really what you have to get at. And when you're trying to teach someone, you want them to learn. But the way adults learn best is through stories. And one of the things that you need to do with your stories is to activate the knowledge that they already have and grow that knowledge with the new information you're bringing in. It's kind of a human instinct. We all know that stories are how we pick up on what social norms are, how we pick up on what we're supposed to do, what we're not supposed to do. And so all of these things, I could go through my academic history and all this stuff, and story is always the underpinning of my life and the lens through which I view everything. And it's probably irritating when people try to talk to me and I'm like, oh, narrative. These days, luckily, I work as a narrative designer and storytelling consultant because that's a term that helps me connect with people for marketing purposes, for business planning, for game development, for instructional design, for life coaching even, because the core of storytelling is getting at what you believe about yourself or what you want to believe about yourself, and what the person you're telling the story to believes about themselves and what they want to believe about themselves. And this is how people want a story to connect to. And so that's important for politics, and it's important for games. So interactive storytelling is for game development at least, is baseline. We tell stories, you click things, you move things, you watch them move, you provide input, the output is the game. Like it's this mutual relationship with this program you've got going on. My fascination these days especially is immersive storytelling, which brings it to the next level. And it's kind of my fascination all around, because interaction can just be, as I learned with trying to teach health and safety to oil rig workers, people just want to click through. They don't really care what they're seeing here, or they don't want to read all the words, or they don't want to see the flying pictures, and ooh, it's flashy, but it doesn't mean anything. But immersive storytelling is really about making things that stick. Like creeping into your audience's head and planting a seed there and making them walk away and keep that with them. And then it grows with them. I was working on my PhD in New Zealand on fandom, essentially, and communities, and how fan artists and writers joined communities and then built their own followings and began creating their own original work supported by the fans that they brought with them from the fan work they did. It's one of the ways people make a living as an artist these days. And I'm fascinated by the concept of making a living as an artist. The primary thing with immersive storytelling and really getting people to engage with what you're doing is to not only activate their knowledge, but activate their senses. And this is something we can do without virtual reality. It's not something you have to, be in the world, smell the dirt, taste the dirt. Although, if we get to that point, it might be cool, maybe not dirt, but we'll see. But it's, there are articles about this, the idea of the senses. Actually, I have in my notes, whiteboard. Let's talk about the senses. What senses do we have as human beings?
Sight.
Sorry.
Smell.
I'm trying to write without looking. Sight, smell,
Taste.
Balance.
Balance? Excellent. Touch.
Full bladder. Full bladder.
Full bladder. Excellent. So that kind of physical discomfort. Positioning. Orientation and positioning. Yeah. I'm getting these words crossed. Position, orientation. Doom. We know what a sense of doom feels like, right? That's a sense. Look at my list over here. What all did I put on the list?
Schadenfreude.
Oh, yes! That is an excellent one that I had not written down earlier. But excellent because that is often, or can be, at least when you're playing Sims and games like that, one of the motivators of what you do and how you play.
What does it mean?
Schadenfreude, it's a German term that means the sense of satisfaction you get from watching somebody else screw up.
Computer.
Like it's the... so what's the... Is that Estonian word?
Yes.
What's it?
Like happiness for sorrow.
Yes. Yeah, that... I love that Estonians have that too. Makes sense in the context, but yeah.
Hearing is missing.
Hearing. Oh, yes. That's a very yes. And I had written down balance and rhythm, you know, not just physical rhythm, but pacing, because that is something also important in storytelling and games, and language, and just all of it. Wonder, self. The human senses aren't limited just to what our external input factories are. We've got a lot of things that go on. Our gut instincts. I'm just going to put guts here because that's another important one. We can connect with our audiences in our storytelling, not because storytelling, depending on the medium you use, you're limited. And the creativity we find within the constraints that are on us is what really brings good stories to the surface. Because I mean I like to think of like classic poets and classic poetry where you have a strict format, but you can make really cool things happen by staying within that format. You can do unexpected things. You can subvert expectations, and subverting expectations. Like you have to know the rules in order to break the rules, because otherwise people just think you're screwing around or you're an amateur, and that can be true. It's cool to screw around. It's cool to be an amateur. But learn the rules to break the rules. That's what I told my film students, at least. So, flip my notes back over. Flip them over again. That was the right one. So with the human senses, and with our storytelling, with immersive storytelling, what we need to do is, when we cannot account for certain ones, you don't really want to affect someone's bladder unless, actually, now that I think about it, if you could, like, I've been working on a mobile game recently, and the structure of the game and the structure of the story is intended to happen in 2 to 3 minute chunks. So you have and it's a very story-centric game publisher. So you have a brief intro, brief gameplay, 2 to 3 minute gameplay, brief outro. And so you tell a story with this basic rhythm in place. And but it's only 2 to 5 minute chunks of gaming. But you could binge it. People love to binge things these days. And what if you set up a game where you kind of unintentionally push the boundaries of physical discomfort for your players? No, like you're giving me a look, but I know people who've worn diapers for like game launches. You know, like maybe I've known some serious people, but no, like so, like what if? Because as game developers, we have I'm assuming all of you here are involved in game development. I knew there were some story writing folks invited, but I don't know if they showed up. We have amazing amounts of power. At the Talent meeting a month or two ago, we had a story about UX. Well, my talk was about UX, but we had psychologists in, and they didn't really know what they were getting into. Bless their hearts. But because they actually said, they were like, well, on our walk here, we discussed if we actually wanted to even talk to you guys, because we were afraid of what you might do with the knowledge. And they were right to be afraid. But also not, because they didn't really have an understanding of what indie devs do, for one thing. But also, it was...
Yes, but data has a lot of, heavy...
It does.
Mobile usage also.
It does, yeah. So they were right to be afraid, and also even us small guys are also like, we make games that intentionally manipulate people's time and energy and thought patterns. And like for me, a good game is the kind that I'm still thinking about after I stop playing it. It's the one that I'm dreaming about playing, and I'm not pissed off about dreaming about playing it. Like package sorting, I hate this. I did this as a job. No. But like when you get into that world, when you become immersed in the world, when someone plants a seed in your brain, you end up stuck there. And you live in that world, and that world lives in you. To get back to the immersive thing. I mean, so what are the traits that these stories kind of, these games, these things bring to us? They make us feel fear, or like an intense trouble with our sense of self. sometimes. Maybe not everybody likes the whole like dark and fantasy things, but like the opportunity, like I love Skyrim. I like the opportunity to run around beautiful forests and mountains and put in God mode and jump over a mountain and pick a bunch of flowers. Like I could do it in real life, but I couldn't make a potion out of it, you know? These minor rewards that are pretty great. But again, the sense of wonder, this beautiful landscape, these magical powers, and these, okay, I get really excited. Tell me if I need to slow down at all. Oh, I thought you were putting up some like jams. I was like, yeah.
No,
No.
I forgot something.
Okay. Cool. Sorry for calling you out.
No, no, I should say sorry for
So, playing with our players' senses is what we kind of need to work with in order to get to kind of get into that immersion, to plant that immersion seed inside of people. And I want to bring it back to, because these are all things that I think about constantly. Like, maybe not everybody thinks about, man, I wonder how I can make someone have to play a game where until their bladders are ready to burst. But these are the kinds of things I'm curious about, because, you know, we could do that. You know, but Marco promised that I'd use my powers for good tonight, so I will get off of that idea, but I am really intrigued. Sorry?
Quite a lot of online games currently are playing with bladders because you can't stop it.
Exactly. Yes. Like, because you have to just drop in and play and go.
Yeah.
But then you have things like Apex Legends and the battle royales that have like time limits, where you know it's quick, it's brief, you just boom, you're done. But then you end up hitting continue. It's just like binging on Netflix. You know, are you sure you want to watch the next episode? Quit asking me, just put me in. I mean, have they put an automatic restart in Apex Legends or any of those games yet? Or do you have to like physically click, yeah, put me back in the game again? I don't play Fortnite, so I don't know anything about that, but I hear it's real popular with the youths. Pokemon Go, people go all over the place. Yeah, so bringing back around, when it comes to developing your games, when it comes to whether you're starting off and like getting the seed, or if you are already developing it and kind of feeling lost with it, or you think you know what it is, and whether or not you've given it out to the world yet or not, it's I find it really important to think about the atmosphere. Because the atmospheric storytelling incorporates all of the senses, whatever they are. Because when you're building a world, or an in-game world, I should specify, you're creating a space in which a character lives, moves, interacts. But then you're also creating the on-game world, the user interface, the menus, the settings, the place where the player lives, interacts, moves around. And then as developers and studios, you also have this around the world building, the Steam pages, the Discord, the wikis, the media, the social media, of this world that exists around the game, the transmedia side of things, where you kind of reveal bits about the game that don't exist in the game. I was so baffled when I first played Overwatch, because I came to Overwatch from Tumblr, and I was expecting a lot more gayness. I was real excited, I had heard stories, but it turns out all of that was just the transmedia comic stuff, the Tumblr fodder. Let's be honest, we love it. But the game itself is really just like 5v5, done. And I was like, oh, that's not very gay at all. But it's called color me disappointed. But I wasn't that disappointed. It's still a pretty fun, flashy game, and they have the around the world storytelling going on that brings in players who wouldn't otherwise be there. And that's kind of one of the goals, I think, of selling games, is to get new players. Could be wrong, I don't really sell many games these days, yet. But I'm not responsible for that part, at least. But yeah, so when we talk about the atmosphere, getting a solid sense from the outset, preferably, of what your atmosphere is going to be, an atmospheric palette, the same way that you might have a color palette. You know, figuring out what senses do you really want your game to play with. Like, do you have a mechanic you absolutely love? And is that why you're building this game? Like, why are you building the game? And not for your personal reasons, but who are you building the game for? What do you want your players to feel after they leave the game? You know, because you're building this world. That's, I mean, unless you are literally just making Tetris, which power to you, you're creating something you want people to be a part of. But how do you want them to feel about it? I think, because like I'm looking at a lot of the games in the Estonian circle right now, and like all of them have very solid ideas. Like, you know, here's the world, here's the kind of stuff we're going with. Some of them have changed, clearly, as we discussed, because these things develop. But having a solid atmospheric palette that's like clear across the team. Have these questions that the groups can come back to. What does your player need to know right now at this point in the game? What does your player need to feel right now at this point in the game? And what does your player need to think at this point? Because a lot of games and a lot of interactive storytelling is focused around what the player does. And that's where the interaction begins and ends. And building instructional design, you know, it can easily stop right there. Like, what do? They click the box. You know, what do? They point and click, point and click, point and click. Okay, but do your mechanics reflect the feelings that you want the player to come out with? Does the atmosphere, like, is your atmosphere permeating every segment? Do all of your design decisions come back to that core idea of how your player feels? Because if you want someone to immerse themselves in your game, you've got to make them feel, you know? And whether it's schadenfreude, whether it's discomfort, whether it's the creeping sense of dread that happens when you hear slightly off-key minor chords just slowly building. Like, if you're into existential terror, for example, that's fun. How do you make people feel that? Like, one of the games I've been playing recently, Source of Madness, they've got really cool physics, and they're creepy as hell. Like, it's H.P. Lovecraft inspired, and a lot of the things are like tentacles and flopping about and very organic but uncanny organic. And they kind of shape the game around these physics. And it works, at least for me, because I'm like, ooh, this is not a type of game I would normally play, but the mechanics are really interesting. Another Estonian-based game is Empires and Ruins, if you were at Game Dev Days. What I really like about that is the user interface there is really reflective, like the mouse hover texts reinforce the primary character that you're playing as. Like, they're all snarky and foul and hilarious because you're interacting with this interface as a first sergeant dealing with shit you don't want to deal with. And so, like, every interaction, like, makes you feel like, why is this complicated? Oh, right, it's reinforcing the fact that this guy doesn't want to be doing this. Or it does kind of make you feel a bit drunk because the guy's a bit drunk. And so these things are still in development and still working on things, but I find them fun to play because they reinforce that sense of, like, I've never played 4X or Tower Defense, but I started playing this because local developers, and I'm like, yeah. And then I got really into it because I was like, whoa, this is, you know, you mix it up, you get the whole package going, and you're like, this guy's an asshole, and everyone in this game is unforgivable. Like, you don't really like anybody. They've intentionally designed everyone to be unlikable. But it's still a game you like playing because you like not liking them. And you kind of find a way to connect yourself to these people that you don't actually like, and it makes, I mean, not exactly existential terror, but it brings you back to that uncertainty about yourself. Like, wow, I'm starting to use casual workers as cannon fodder. Whoops. But like, I like when I started playing, I felt really bad about that. And now I'm like cackling madly with the power, because games that get inside your head, they twist you, for good or for ill. And of course, as you promised, we're using that power for good tonight. So, and actually, one of my favorite focuses is how do we train people to be kind? Because kindness is not a state of being. Kindness is not something that just some people are and some people aren't. It takes practice. It's hard. It's not easy to be nice. Well, it's not being nice. It's not easy to be kind to people. Being nice is very shallow, but being kind is like, I'm like, okay, yeah, I know you're in a place. I'll walk away from it because I can't help you with the place you're in, and I'm sure you're in a place aside from the physical chair right there. But you know, like that kind of conscious awareness of how other people are moving through the world. And I think kindness is honestly a good skill for game developers, because if you want to create an immersive story, you have to think about where other people are in the world, where your player is. And this goes back to the idea of mechanics as well, because the medium influences the story. The story doesn't exist without the medium through which it is told. And I'm wavering back and forth about how I feel about games, like cross-platform games, because the controls change. The physical way you interact with a game changes, whether you're on console or PC or mobile. You know, and so when you can design for known physical mechanics, it again comes to those constraints that allow you to be really creative. Whereas if you have to fit all the different things, all the different platforms for your one story, I have trouble with that personally, but I'm learning to be better about it. But one of my favorite writers is Neil Gaiman. And when the book Stardust was being made into a movie, I was really big into reading his blog then and his talks about, you know, being a writer and this process of his novel being made into a movie. And he said something there that really struck me, which was, this movie is not the book. The story has to change in order for this story to be a movie. And so when it comes to the world building that we do, and the kind of way we design our interactions and our goal of immersion, we have to take into consideration how our players are playing. For example, are they sitting in a chair? Like, are they? I'm really fascinated with mobile. I'm fascinated with everything. I have boundless enthusiasm. But mobile games. Because a lot of them are just tap, 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 drag, slide, tap, 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 tap. But I spend a lot of my time people watching, because I live above a street that's very heavy with tourists. And I really like watching how people interact with their phones when they're not gaming. And I want to make games, like I'm interested in making games that incorporate the mechanics of how people use their phones when they're not gaming. Because we've had smartphones for 10, 12 years now. They're not going away. These handheld devices are a part of us, and they're a part of our daily lives. Whether it's a 5-year-old like walking down the street, and I'm just like, or like a person with their phone taking a photo of these beautiful old buildings, standing next to someone with like a professional camera, taking photos of these beautiful old buildings, or like Google Maps. Like people are actually, when you watch tourists, they're really engaged in the physical space that they're in. And they're not immersed in their phone, they're immersed in the world around them through their phone, or with the assistance of their phone, whether it's a translation app, whether it's a map, whether they're FaceTiming with someone and being like, yo, look, or taking pictures of either themselves or the buildings around them. They're using their devices, their mobile phones, as ways of engaging with the world around them, and without using augmented reality. And I think that's something really cool and potential to explore, because Reigns, and I've been playing Reigns for Majesty, but it's a mobile game, but I play it on PC, but which does make a difference, because reading about it, they developed it for mobile because it's based off of Tinder. Like it's a series of questions. The storytelling, if you haven't looked at the narrative design of the Reigns and Reigns for Majesty and that set of stories, it's fascinating. It's very modular. They write the stories themselves in Excel spreadsheets because it's a series of yes or no questions. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. But you play a series of monarchs throughout generations, and each of your decisions has an impact on your relationship with the church, the people, the military, and the treasury. You know, so every decision you make has an impact. And they have wider stories being told over the arc of the entire game, as well as within each individual arc of the lives lived by each monarch. And for me, it's a really fascinating way of telling stories and interactive stories. Because you, as the player, through your Tinder, like, yeah, none, I don't actually know which way you go with Tinder, I'm just pretending here. I downloaded it once and it was horrible. Somebody says, oh yeah, it's a great way to meet friends. That's not what it's for! God, but mechanics of it, anyway, they apparently become universal. But no, so I like this game because it does incorporate the mechanics of how we use our phones when we're not playing games. And I find that really cool. And it does become immersive because it is building this whole story, but using a very subtle mechanic because, and I think very like subtly brilliant mechanic. But getting back to the whole atmosphere thing, having an atmospheric core to your game is important when you're making all of your design decisions. It's important when you're doing coding. It's important when you're doing narrative design. It's important when you're doing your marketing. Like you need to like compare all the stuff you do. Does this reflect what? Well, it needs to either highlight, reflect, or amplify what your game is intended to do, how your players are intended to feel. Because, and this goes back to the know the rules before you break the rules. Because we have had decades of storytelling and media that follow certain patterns. You know, boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy faces challenge, the classic hero's journey, you know, all of these cycles that you can subvert. But if you don't know the points at which subversion would be welcome, or you don't know what makes a good subversion, like have you guys ever read, like can you think of a movie or a book or a game where you went through the whole thing and then like they lost you in the last like 15 minutes? And you're like, you fucking did that? Anybody?
Interstellar.
Interstellar? What did they do there? Spoiler alert. What happened in Interstellar? How did they lose you?
It's the paradox they introduced at the end.
They introduced a paradox.
Yeah, that was.
It wasn't present anywhere else. The foreshadowing was shit.
Well, it explained everything, yes, but it's like I went into it as a science-based movie, and then they kind of went against science. It was like.
Okay, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. So you set it out as being one thing, and if you don't subvert it correctly, you end up with people who are like, that sucked. That wasn't right. Like, there's an entire, like, tag on Archive of Our Own about Harry Potter epilogue. What epilogue? Because people are like, are you kidding me? You're just going to write it off like that? Well, we're going to cut those bits out of the book, and, you know. Because people become immersed. People find these worlds. People have seeds planted in them, and they grow these worlds. And whether you're expressing your fandom by playing a game repeatedly, or by creating new works, transformative works. Whether you're making art, whether you're making a game that's based as a fan work of something else, because that too happens. Yeah, it's one of those things that like you need to know what the rules are so that you can break them. Because I'm not all about following the rules necessarily every time, but if you set people up, Anton Chekhov has Chekhov's law in theater. If you bring a gun on stage in the first act, you've got to use it by the third act. Like, you can't just bring the gun on stage and sit it on the table and never mention it again or never talk about it again. Unless you're doing a play that was written specifically for theater students or people aware of Chekhov's law. And then every other element of the play kind of reinforces or subverts those ideas of what you're allowed to do, what you're expected to do. Having that gun on the table will heighten the tension throughout the play. You know, having that gun on the table will heighten the tension throughout the game. People see that thing and they're like, I know that thing means something. You don't just put that out there. So if you're building a game where tension is a major thing, like consider those elements you can bring in, whether it's sound, whether it's like if you're doing mobile games or Switch or anything that has you like physically moving, the affective storytelling, the way that what you create affects the physical bodies, whether it's, I can't stop thinking about this one now. Thank you for that. But how are you affecting the physical bodies of the people? How they move, the mechanics themselves? Are they reinforcing your atmosphere? Are they amplifying your atmosphere? You know, like how do you bring those things back around? And I tend to lean heavily towards the creepy because I'm creepy, but not everybody is, and some people are, you know, better at other things. You know, some people like really want to get that high octane, like woof, 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 you know, the energy, the brrrr. I use a lot of sound effects. Sorry, it's just occurring to me. Like, good thing we don't have closed captioning on this. I feel sorry for whoever would be doing that. I've lost my own train of thought in the sound effects. Atmosphere and reinforcing and knowing the rules so you can break the rules. Then Batman's staring at me and I'm not doing well, man. So keeping those questions in mind, returning to this kind of atmospheric core, returning to these questions of what does your player need to know? What does your player need to think? What does your player need to feel? Because what they do will come from that. If someone is immersed in the game, their next actions will make sense to them. And that's why user interface is also important, because it does need to be intuitive in the way that your game is built and in the way that your story is being told. Not all user interfaces look the same. They don't need to look the same. They shouldn't look the same. There are some things that are expected. And this again goes to know the rules so you can break the rules. You don't want to have 3 nested menus. Like people will just give up and be like, flip a table, I'm done here, rage quit. I like playtesting like alpha and beta builds just so I can tell the developers when I rage quit. But no, so there are certain rules you need to follow with user interface. You know, make sure people can read it. Make sure the contrast is high. Don't use too many nests. Don't use massive walls of text. Unless, and this is knowing the rules to break the rules, you have it as a pop-up. Or you have it revealed as like an object description, or it comes up as a book. Have the lore, but hide the lore. Like Skyrim and its, does anybody know the actual count of how many books are in Skyrim? I'm not that dedicated of a player. But yeah, they have these lore. They have the world that they've built within the world. And it's accessible, but it's not necessarily easily accessible. You might have to hunt to find a rare book if you're that kind of guy. And it's not necessarily, it doesn't interrupt the flow of players who don't give a crap. You know, so it's kind of playing to everyone. You know you're going to have the players who are completionists. They will flip every corpse. They will search every pocket just to make sure there's nothing good. Like the first time I played Skyrim, I picked up every broom I found because I could. And that was because my expectation was, if you see a thing and you can touch a thing, that means you're supposed to keep that thing, right? And so Skyrim had to teach me a new kind of mechanic because I didn't know it, but that's how they decided to make it, and everything else was cool enough to make it worthwhile. And so I've played Skyrim on console and PC, and it's a different experience both ways because how you move around, how you watch what's happening, whether you're going for the video experience or the PC WASD experience. But it was immersive, and that made it worthwhile to learn the new mechanics. Because if you throw someone into a game where you're like, you throw someone into a game, you're obsessed with the mechanic you've created, and you're like, this is the coolest thing, but nobody understands how to use it, then they're going to drop off. So you have to try to think of some other way to keep them in, or to convince them that your mechanic is the thing to go with, or the type of character you're playing. If you're doing something unusual, if you are breaking a rule, you need to have other things that make people want to stick around. And that's why having a kind of atmospheric core is useful. Because if you can establish through the marketing process, if you can establish through the color schema, if you can establish through the sounds you use, the expectations of what the player's going to have to deal with, they'll be more willing to take on new things. You have to activate the existing knowledge in order to build on it. You have to give them something they're familiar with in order to introduce the unfamiliar. Because if you start playing that slightly off-key minor note, you know, highly creeping into the... If you start doing that kind of thing and then you don't pay off, that's the gun sitting on the table. And people are going to be like, why did you make me so het up about this? I got so nervous, I was ready for something to jump out at me, and then it didn't. And then you have to jump out at them. And yeah, so you have to know the rules to break the rules. Music, sound, all of this is atmosphere. User interface is atmosphere. How are they having to interact? Is all the user interface on the sides? Is it in the corners? Are your players on Mac or PC? If you're doing a computer-based game, because how you close a window, as I learned trying to figure out Macs, is different. Yeah, so if you have some kind of control over the platform or method that they're using to play, this can help shape your designs. Like, how do you make a Windows user really uncomfortable? Put all their close icons on the left side. Like, speaking from personal experience, like that's off-putting. It makes you uncomfortable. It upsets your balance because things aren't where they're supposed to be. And of course, Mac users will fight with me about this, and it's okay. But yeah, the position, the orientation, the touch, like, do you have, like, if you're on a mobile, or like the haptic feedback, you know, if you're touching things, you know, or even just the interaction, like, does it make like a gooey, like, whoop? Like, it should be that wobbly when you click it? Like, normally when you click something, it just highlights, but what happens if you make it wobbly instead? Do you have something wobbly in your atmospheric core? Like, is there something about the wobbly aesthetic that really, like, just kind of reinforces, and I think, again, of Source of Madness, where, like, the trees bend uncomfortably and they fling back up, and they use these physics to, like, to affect the gameplay. And like, the tentacle monsters are, like, rolling over and flipping and springing at you, and it's uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable, but it's effective because you're moving through it, and you're like, okay, this is not you have two shooting options: right click, left click, right click, left click, and you're wearing rings, and the rings shoot out things, and that's the combat. It's a side-scrolling combat with rings and tentacle monsters, and I like creepy things. Sorry, so I'm gonna erase all our senses here just because. I have whiteboard written on my notes again. This is wretched. I'm sorry. But I'm actually looking at guts as I erase it. That's one of the most fun things to play with when it comes to your players. How can you affect what they feel, what they instinctively think should happen next? Because we do have expectations, and we are kind of precious about them. Like, nothing will get people angrier than telling them there's going to be a new movie in the series that they love the most, but telling them that someone they don't like is going to star in it. Like, ooh, you chose the wrong Batman, you know? Or, ooh, you made them girls. But people get head up about this because we all have our expectations. We all have these things that we tie our identities, we tie ourselves to, our central understanding of who we are and what it means to be us, to the stories around us. And I think this is one of the reasons that immersive storytelling and interactive storytelling, games in particular, are especially important, because they're a way of telling stories that get people to actually put themselves into the experience. And when it comes to instructional design, like, we are trying to get people to say, okay, you know, you need to learn it. We can't just say, learn this, but you're trying to get people to put themselves in the position of, well, I haven't worn a safety helmet the past 3,000 times I've been out on the job, but you need to get them in the place of saying, hey, you know what happens when you don't wear a safety helmet? It's not the 3,000 times that's the problem, it's the one time. You know, it's not the falling that hurts, it's the landing. You know, and you have to kind of bring people to these things and get them there. And games have the opportunity to kind of take media to the next level. And it's kind of becoming an expectation for players and for humans, just people, to have a certain amount of say in the stories that they're being told. Whether it's shouting on Facebook about it, whether it's participating in the Discord, or participating in a marketing campaign, or Netflix with their, not Babadook, Bandersnatch. You know, it's interactive film. You know, people are starting to think that they should have more say in what happens with their stories. And it's not a unique idea. Sherlock Holmes died. Arthur Conan Doyle was so off with him. He was done with the character. Nobody wanted to pay attention to his mystical writings because they were paying attention to Sherlock Holmes. And he was like, all right, I'm done. I'm tired of being the Sherlock Holmes guy. I'm killing him. Reichenbach falls. Woof! And people got so pissed off that he had to bring him back because they were like, you can't do that. There were letter writing campaigns. Like, this stuff existed. Fan fiction existed before copyright. Like, it wasn't fan fiction, that's just how you write stories. Copyright was created to control fan fiction, essentially, or protect publishers, etc. See also my unfinished PhD. But getting back to the immersive storytelling game, the future of storytelling, we have the opportunity to create good things in the world, or teach people better ways of viewing the world or interacting with the world. You know? Like, people immerse themselves, they can binge on games. You spend hundreds of hours grinding for various rewards. But what are you learning from that? Are you learning anything, or are you wasting time? I mean, you could be wasting time and making money for somebody else, but as game developers, couldn't we be doing something better? Like, I mean, yes, it's nice to make money off of people, and it's, you know, that's great, but we're kind of the next wave of storytelling that's actually, we're prepped for the interactive storytelling, because that's what games have been all along. But now we've got to get to that point where we are aware of the influence we could have, and potentially making use of the influence we could have. I think about these things constantly. I think about many things constantly. But we have real impacts on the people that play our games. Hopefully, if we're doing it right, we'll have an impact on the people playing our games, or if we want to have that impact, unless we just want to make, you know, cow clicker. Could do. So kind of going back to the senses, I kind of made a summary kind of thing of when you're building your atmospheric palette, like, and contemplating the senses that you want to toy with, whether you're approaching it from, I have an art idea, or I have a story idea, or I have a mechanics idea. Thinking about your player in terms of what do you want their rational senses to do? You know, how do you want them to logically feel or logically think through your story? Like, what do they need to know to make rational sense of how they play and what they're playing? What about physical sense? You know, like whether you're doing 3 to 5 minute chunks because it's casual gaming and you're just, you know, letting people do this because you want them to just have something fun to do while they're waiting on the bus. Whether you're going for binge gamers, whether you're going for people who like the esports guys who are actually jogging constantly and staying in great physical shape, like whether you're going for people who have to be like ready for it. I like to pretend that esports people are a lot more physical than they possibly are.
Well, they usually have to, because, you know, reaction time and whatnot depends on how physical you are.
Exactly, reaction time. That's not even something I was considering, but like these are physical skills that we have to train, or we don't have to, we can train people into. hand-eye coordination, reaction time, those physical attributes. Like, do you want your game? Is it important to the world of your game that the player react quickly? How do you incentivize quick reactions? How do you make it easier or harder? What obstacles do you put in the way of having the right combination of reactions or the speed of interaction that you want? What are the emotional ways that the emotional senses are you building for sympathy? Are you going for Schadenfreude? Are you wanting to make a game where you hate everybody in the game but you still want to play the game? Like how do you want your players to emotionally react to your game? Do you want them to walk away going like, far out, man, that was great. Like, The Last Guardian. It's a puzzle platformer. It's step by step. There's one way to solve each level, and you solve the level and you move on. But that game is beautiful, not only because of the art, but because it's the story of this developing relationship between you, the child human character, and this cat, dog, dragon beast. And it's beautiful, it's fun, and you get to watch this develop, and you solve puzzles together, and it's really cute. But it's also it's a beautiful emotional interaction. What about spiritual or moral way? Well, how do you want to affect your players? Like, do you want to have any impact on their sense of self or their sense of moral well-being? Do you want to make people question things about themselves or feel more reinforced and like, oh yeah, hard work, that's the thing, you know? Like, oh yeah, I can learn that cooperating with each other. Yes, cooperation. That's how we build things. That's how the world comes together. I show you the cool spaceships I made. You show me your cool spaceships. We build things. Or in a religious way, like are you honestly trying to get people to believe or disbelieve in any particular faith or spirituality? Do you want to trigger those kinds of questions of, are there things greater than me out there? You know, are you trying to just reinforce or reflect on past faiths or religions? Are you trying to educate about them? And what are the instinctual senses that you can tap into? Those things that aren't on the surface, those gut reactions, that uncanny place where people are like, something's not quite right here. You know, and do you tap into that with sound? Do you tap into it with art? Like, is your atmosphere being reinforced because you've got like flat 2D characters on a rich 3D background, and something about that disconnect is made vibrant and strange? These are questions we can ask and kind of get back to that core of how do we want the player to feel. Because it's not, and again this goes to kindness and that kind of conscientious and conscious thought of how are other people feeling? How are other people playing this? How are other people reading this? What are they reading? Because when it comes to, the point about interactive and immersive storytelling is it's not just a one-way conversation. Games aren't just, we give you a game, you push the buttons. I mean, they can be, you know, but good games, it's a two-way thing. Even if you have all the dialogue options set out and they can only choose certain things, the user's journey, the player's journey is beyond the character's journey. And it's kind of I've got the world, like when you're doing world building, you do have this in-world or in-game world, you know, you have the character's quest, the character's journey, and you have the on-game world, the user interface, the menus, the player, what the player interacts with, and you have your around the world. Brought this back again, and it's I kind of covered similar in my talk on UX in game dev a couple months back, but yeah, we have these questions of what kind of journey are you taking people on? Because the characters aren't the only people in your narrative. The players are part of it too. The studio is part of it too. Like, you're all in this together. And like I said, have the lore but hide the lore. Like, you can that sometimes it's worth it to not ever tell anyone like what happened in your protagonist's childhood. Sometimes that's not what the player needs to know right now. Sometimes it's never what the player needs to know. Sometimes it needs No, it doesn't need to, but sometimes it's fun if it just remains a secret, like that you hold deep with you. But you could also share it later in the around the world, around the game world, you know, like in the Discord channel, development updates, the devlogs, the things like this, the things that go into making what you've got.
Okay, I have a question
Yes.
about like you mentioned secrets, like if developer decides to keep one thing secret, so should we still like write it down and acknowledge it, because it might affect, you know, how game flows.
Well, it's a good question because it depends on how much control, I think, that the developer wants to maintain over their, or wants to imagine they maintain over their creation. Because like I said, players, users, readers, audience members will insert themselves if you've done a game right, or if you've done a piece of media right. And people, if you plant the seed, that seed's in their head now. So they may never accept it as canon. Even if you do write it down, acknowledge it, like further development, you know, oh yeah, the second game in the series revealed that this happened. But people were like, nah, man, this is how it really happened. And then they rewrite your game and, you know. But the thing is, like, if you're okay with people running off with it and doing their own thing, like sometimes it's nice to just have that secret core of like, yeah, I'm totally setting those two characters up in my head. But like in fandom terms, there's canon and there's fanon. It's the collective agreement amongst fans of what's real. You know, it's stuff that wasn't necessarily decided or identified in canon, but the fans are just like, no, we're just gonna agree that this character and that character, oh yeah, that explains the dynamics that happened here in canon. Or, oh look, that character has a cat and you don't have a name for who doesn't name their cat. Okay, so everybody agrees that the cat's, this character is the type of person to name their cat after themselves. Could do. I've seen that happen in fanon because that character really was someone who would name his cat after himself. But so when you put something out in the public, it becomes the public's. It's not public domain in a copyright sense, but if you're throwing seeds out into the universe, like if they land, that becomes their seed. Like you've made your story part of their story. And for me, that's really cool. And if but this comes, my background, like my management background, as far as like people in project management goes, is coaching. I've coached sports before, and adult sports and things like roller derby, because it's fun. But you've got to build a certain kind of rapport. And like, as a coach, one of the best things is when the people you've trained become better than you are. Because that's shine coming back on you. Like, you've got them there and they've exceeded you, and that's cool. So if you want to maintain control of the whole thing, and because not everybody's a coach. Not everybody wants to see other people, like, wants to teach other people and see them excel past what that coach did. And so you don't have to take my path of doing it, but like, I'm cool. Like, I would love it if people ran off and were like, oh yeah, I like that you said that, but no. Because convince me, you know, like, yeah, let's not have a conversation, you just believe that. But if it is something you want to influence, if it's going to be part of your atmospheric core, but you're just not revealing it yet, foreshadowing helps. Or like, if you have the kind of secret that you do want to make part of the canon, that's why it's important. Like, all of your atmosphere should reflect, reinforce, and it kind of go back on itself. So even if you don't make it obvious, it should follow a kind of natural progression, even if the pieces didn't fit together immediately. Now, avoid the interstellar route if possible. Like, make sure that like you don't have out there that, oh yeah, this is going to be totally science, wooga. Because then people will be like, what? Why? But you just erased all of the history that you created. And so it's good if you can have a solid idea from the get-go, but of course things change as you go, like stories change, and that's why it's good to have the palette, it's good to have the core to come back to, because that way you can make sure you're making the same game the whole time, even if the mechanics change, even if the music changes, even if all this changes. Like, are you still making the same game? Should you still be making the same game? And sometimes it's cool if you find that this atmospheric core, this atmosphere wasn't working. You know, I spent a couple of months last year mapping out and doing the game design for a dungeon crawler that the only way I could think to do it, the only way I knew how to do it was like via PC, you know, but I couldn't really get the visuals down, so I just kind of pushed it aside and didn't deal with it, you know, but like I had this saw, I was like, yeah, no, I'm gonna do this, I've got all these mazes mapped out, I've got the lights located where they are, I've got the bonuses and the enemies and the weapons, I've got all of this laid out, I've got all of the variables listed and all of their potentials, and I've got all of these, and I couldn't do anything with it. Because like something wasn't clicking, you know. I didn't have I had kind of an atmosphere, but then I've been watching a bunch of strangers out of my window because I'm creepy, like I mentioned, and I realized like maybe this Google Maps thing, maybe this is how the game should be played. Maybe it shouldn't be a point and click kind of thing. Maybe you're dungeon crawling and you're like, oh, here's your person, you fling them that way. Okay, we're going that way now. We're going that way now. Okay, we're going that direction. And so like I'm prototyping this game now, it's a mobile game, and like suddenly it makes sense. Like, oh, that's the mechanic that I needed to reinforce what I, like the core gist of what I wanted the game to be, which is dungeon crawling anywhere you are, like exploring underneath the city, and so in a very kind of realistic sense, but like how do you work that with your phone, you know? Because that's how people explore cities. We use our phones. And so I'm testing it out. I don't know if it's gonna work, but I feel more solid about this now. And then like half the stuff that I wrote out months ago doesn't even matter anymore because those mechanics don't work when you're designing for mobile. So I have to throw all this work out, but I found the core. Like I think this mechanic is kind of the core of what I wanted to get. It's what makes the story that I wanted to tell interesting. Because before it was just a bunch of code, essentially. It wasn't a story. But now I've got the way that people can enter the world. I've got that point of entry that makes something unique happen. And giving people that point of entry is how you immerse yourself in developing the game as well as how you immerse the player in playing the game. You need to have these points where it's obvious that, so this is where I'm starting. What does the player need to know? And does that know mean in the world know? Or in the game know, or around the game know. You know, like with the Chekhov's gun. That wouldn't make sense to anyone who didn't know the theater rule. Or you guys now, because you know the theater rule. Hey! But yeah, I could make a reference to that, and nobody would get it, and then like my entire joke or my entire mechanic or my entire story might fall flat. Because I didn't read the room. I read myself. And so if you put yourself at the center of your game, that's cool for making a game you want to play, but are your players like you? Like, will they have the same knowledge? How do you impart to them the knowledge that you have, that you needed, to make this game, you know? There's a conceptual separation that needs to happen between you and your user, which can be really tricky, or really cool, unnecessary if you're just building a game for you to play like me with my little mobile guy. I want other people to play that, but I'm also well aware, prototyping, it's not going to be a finished game. I honestly think I've covered all the notes I made. With character development, but that's mostly just kind of like, you know, that's going to build your character, they said, you know, as somebody like smacked you upside the head and you fell over, you know. But I may have taken that a bit seriously, and so I kind of think of human character development as character development. Like I said, storytelling permeates everything for me. But yeah, I think that about wraps the things I wanted to talk about. That was entirely less interactive than I set out to make it. But I'll open the floor to interaction now.
There is a question.
Oh, yes.
No, comment read.
Oh.
Okay, so it's a can you like suggest books to read or gameplay writer?
Okay. Well, actually, one of the books I've been reading that I find really interesting, it's a UX book called Evil by Design by Chris Notter. He's a pretty cool UX developer and consultant, and all it does is really takes apart how usually web design is set up to, and how to effectively use web design to get at the guts, and he frames it in the terms of the 7 deadly sins. You know, greed, lust, the other 5. We all saw that movie, probably. Heads in boxes. Spoiler alert. But yeah, and so I found that one really interesting as far as like the ways, because he only highlights examples. He doesn't, and analyzes examples. He doesn't say you should be evil. And it doesn't say necessarily that design is evil, but it does play into this idea of how we can build things that tap into those kind of core instincts of humans. And while it is intended for web development, it is super applicable to game development as well, because it is about how do we get at the heart or the root of someone else's desires. How do we get at the core of what other people want or think or expect, how they behave, and how we can change that behavior. I'm trying to think. I've just started listening to one woman, but I don't think I can. Her name's in my phone, but I haven't heard enough to like really recommend her. I think it's also useful to, and not just because Leisha's great. One of the speakers at Game Dev Days, Leisha Pren, she was, and not just because she's also short and American, but just the consideration of accessibility. As far as when you design your game, like who are you designing it for? How are you designing it? Like accessible games don't have to be, this is a game for the blind. Like, just make a game, but make a game that people can play. The more people who can play your game, the better. Just like Overwatch got me into it by, having their transmedia stories. And transmedia storytelling is fantastic, and kind of everybody has to do it these days. Like, I know some of you are out there making your YouTube videos and doing your regular posts and having Discord channels, and all of these are world building for the games you make. As soon as I start doing more and intensive reading, I promise I'll have better links, and I know on the Discord channel some people will have much better recommendations than I can currently have. But also Neil Gaiman's writings on writing. Stephen King has a book called On Writing as well. But just just read the writing of people whose work you like. Like, honestly, if you found a game writer or a game maker who's created something you really think is cool, go find what they've written. Have they made devlogs? Have they kept a blog? I can't read anything on GitHub, but maybe you can. Like, people who put things out into the world want them to be seen. And often they have these ideas in context that become revealed through interviews or through their publicity or through their about page on their website. And so I think the best way to learn how to do what you want to do better is to read the people who are doing what you want to do, or things aligned with what you want to do, because maybe you want to do something new and cool and different. Then read the stuff of people who've done things that were new and cool and different. I don't think anybody has a solid template. I think if anybody tells you there's one true way to do things, they're probably wrong. And so like even my atmospheric core is wrong. No, not necessarily wrong, but it's one way of looking at it because I always overanalyze everything. But yeah, wish I had better recs, but Evil by Design is pretty cool, pretty creepy. No, any other questions from the digital peanut gallery?
Not right now.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
You started your presentation or the talk by introducing very good point that the game should, or the best stories, they create some kind of like a seed that you plant, and so the players will start digging up this seed outside the game, and so on. So can you give us some examples of good seeds that you have discovered from games?
Okay. Well, I've mentioned Skyrim before, and that they plant seeds within the game, as well as like through their wiki and through the community on their wiki. Like I was reading, for some reason, I was reading like this like pages long debate about the last living Dwemer. Because I was fascinated. I was playing Skyrim and then I got distracted entirely because I was like, wait, what was that thing they just referenced? And so I was like, oh, okay. And then like 3 hours later, I'm like 70 pages deep in the wiki. And yeah, and so that kind of sticks with me. Reigns, Her Majesty, has been one that planted a seed in me, both for the mechanics as well as the structure of the storytelling. Because I think that kind of modular storytelling and writing is really neat, because that was something I hadn't seen done. And that doesn't mean it hadn't been done, just that it hadn't been done where I had seen it. I think, Empire, like most of the things I've mentioned, it kind of in passing, like Empires and Ruins, like the way that Emiliano sets up the user interface to like have snarky responses, like it's both accessible, or kind of like he has the text hover, which is not something I would do if I were building a website, but he uses it to both identify what these buttons do, because he has a lot of buttons in the user interface, but also give you a sense of the personality of the main character. And I hadn't seen that done either. His game also includes a mechanic that I had never used, but is apparently apparently common within the genre, but this is a genre that I was new to. The click and drag of the center wheel. Like, I find myself doing that on Google Maps now, and I get so frustrated when I can like scroll, can't click and drag. And I'm like, use this button now, fine. I've been using that button literally since '80 something. And yeah, it's magical. That like now I'm like, oh, here's this whole thing that like is in my head. And then there are stupid games. Like I've played some free-to-play games where, and it's the kind that I get mad about, where like in my sleep I am like busting monsters, and I'm like, why is this so compelling? There's no reason for this to be so compelling. You just grind at it a lot, and then it sticks with you, you know? And so I'm not necessarily as proud of that one, but it's a thing that's stuck. What about you guys, though? What's inspired you to do what you do? Anything that's stuck with you that you're like, whoa, that's something I can grow with, that's something I can do.
This war of mine,
Mm-hmm.
it was really depressing.
Oh. But it stuck with you?
Yeah.
Is that why you're so deadpan? It got to you early?
Yeah, indeed. No, it gave like a really different spin about war zones.
Mm-hmm.
Usually when you go into war zone, you're like hero or you're
Mm-hmm.
a soldier shooting and killing everything. But
Mm-hmm.
in this war of mine, you are a civilian who is starving in like deserted location, but trying to survive set amount of days.
Right.
So
Wow.
so that was totally different spin.
Yeah.
And another game that kind of got me interested in storytelling was Toggle did a game named Unicorn Simulator.
Unicorn Simulator.
Yes.
Okay, tell me more about this.
No, it's kind of small and really pointless, but it's kind of similar to your game you mentioned, the Rain.
Mm-hmm.
It had also like randomly generated story snippets that kind of formed with every different with every places, and you had like different story.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of interesting.
Neat. Yeah, because like I could tell you what the things are I've written fan fiction about, but they're mostly film or web comics, or books, also books. I haven't written any fan fiction about games yet, but I did start developing a fan game of a game that hasn't been released yet. Yeah, because their marketing campaign's so good. Boyfriend dungeon, date your weapons, like. Yeah, like I don't play dating sims. I don't really play that kind of battle game. But I love the idea of dating your weapons and like you develop a better relationship with your weapons, so you do more damage, but they turn into a person. And so I started making like a speed dating sim, based on like this. Like I got not terrible, better than I could do. Like icons and graphics off a Humble Bundle, and I challenged myself. I was like, all right, I want to make a game with this. And I came up with one really cool game, which was not the dating sim one. And then I was like, no, but actually I have all these weapon image icons. What if I made a fan game of this game? Because that was one of those things. I'm like, oh yeah, dating sims not usually my thing. Actually, one of the Estonian developers, Julia Rasa, she and her team at a game jam made a game called Love Bug, and yeah, I've never been to a game jam until this coming weekend. But I've played this game, and as it turns out, I was talking to Marco earlier, and it turns out the game is pretty accurate. Aside from the whole like dating sim thing, because it's also a dating sim set at a game jam. But it also kind of inspired me to be like, hey, yeah, game jams, because I've always failed the dating side of it, but I'm really good at bug testing, and I thought that was fun. So, yeah. Yeah, what about you? I mean, what have you had that seed planting experience?
I don't know if it's a seed planting experience of my own, but I just recently watched a YouTube video about Don't Starve developers, or how they develop their game. And one cool idea they had there was that in the game they left a lot of secrets. So there was like basic stuff that everybody would know, like how to like pick carrots and get food. But like 60% or even 80% of the game was such that most of the players would never like encounter. So they did that, like half of the game was like opened up at the middle of the game. So or once you have played like a lot of hours, you will like discover it, and then it's like a wow moment for you.
Yeah.
And they intentionally leave it there so that people like who would eventually like discover it, they would like really start talking about this thing and make YouTube videos and start
and kind
spreading
of
it
build
out.
that and kind of incentivize other players to continue the game or to discover the other parts of the game. That's really cool. I like that kind of idea. It's an interesting kind of iceberg storytelling, because you can tell it. You can have a complete game that only covers like 10% of what your story. And this kind of goes back to the story is the medium. The medium is the story. When you build a world, you don't have to put that whole world into a single game. I have a story that I've been developing for years, and it's really cool, and it's massive, and it's huge, but like not every part of that story needs to be told in the same format. So some of it might be audio recordings, like an oral history. Some part of it might be a fiction, some part of it might be a play, who knows, you know? But this world lives in my head, and you can kind of feed it out at different points. So like no one will ever know the full world that's in my head, that kind of iceberg thing. But I like that idea of like the revelation as a, not just marketing tool, but also just kind of a way of like letting people play through a whole game without ever having to discover all the other stuff, but then being able to go back and discover that. I can see why that stuck with you. Nice.
Oak Warrior.
Oh, that guy.
Okay, maybe you will read that one because my English is kind of crappy.
Okay, sorry. I need to not be rude to him. Oh, look, ooh, I'm still standing on the thing.
Delay is.
Oh, yes. How do you gauge when it's more effective to lead on the player with limited information, to have them figure out something in the plot, versus giving them direct guidelines? Also, is that Giannis talking right now?
Yes, it was him talking. And I think, like, for me, it goes back with how much, or how do you decide when you need to lead the player to discover their own things versus what, or telling them up front. In fiction writing, or in writing in general, there's the rule, show, don't tell. This isn't always true again, know the rules to break the rules. But for me, like, it would come back to that kind of atmospheric core, that kind of central idea of how do I want the player to feel. If I want the player to feel more lost, then don't reveal as much. If I'm trying to think of an example, and I can't stop thinking about this webcomic about D&D, where like an elf, they're 5 characters meet in a tavern, and the elf is like, I come from the tribe of this, and I'm with my elf eyes, and then like the barbarian is just like, smack. Where are we fighting? Like, not every player will want the full reveal. Not every story needs the full reveal. If it comes down to it, play test or talk amongst other people. Be like, does it make sense to reveal this now? Is this something the player needs to know? Is this something that they need to know right here in this way? Because what you give the player will guide their actions. And so how do you want to guide them? Where do you want them to go? What do you want them to feel? Do they need to know all of that stuff in order to start the game or to take their next step? If there is a lot of information that they need to know, does it need to be given all up front, or should you expand that portion? Should you dive more deeply into that segment of the world before moving on to the next thing that you thought you wanted them to do? What is the purpose of your story? What do you want them to think? What do you want them to know? What do you want them to feel? Because what you reveal and what you withhold will affect how the player plays the game. And kind of like with your, what's the name of that?
It was a CDC talk from
okay.
Don't Starve development.
That's right. The Don't Starve, yeah.
Actually, in this talk, there was another very cool example,
Mm-hmm.
specifically by this game. When they developed it, originally it's like an open world game pretty much, so you can do whatever you ever want to do. Initially, they wrote the goals on the screen. So in the first hour of the gameplay, they told you that you should collect wood and make fire and so on and so on. And then when they tested it worked too well. So they teach the players to follow the guides. They really did exactly as the guides told them. And once the guides ended, the guys were like, okay, now what should we do now?
Yeah.
So if the goal was like survive, then once the people collected a bunch of food and just sit by the fire and played the most boring game ever, by just eating their food and
we survived.
And then passing few days. So pretty much through this tutorial, developers teach the players to play it like boringly. So based on that, they actually they wrote an article and they removed those guidelines from the game.
Yeah, well, and the tutorial and how players first start playing the game. Because like every game you start off as the prisoner trapped, and then you get miraculously released or whatever, and you don't necessarily hear that you're the Dragonborn until much later. You may hear rumors of the dragon shows up and you have the ability, whatever. But I think, and this goes kind of, I'm going to gesture here to rhythm, the rhythm and the pacing. When you go back to that kind of atmospheric idea, and if you are looking at rhythm as one of the things, and rhythm should always be something you keep in mind. Like, what is the rhythm of gameplay? Are you doing 5-minute sets? Are you doing, what are they called? When you've got the guilds and you're all going in together in your guild to do a raid. That's it, thank you. It's a 4-letter word. So yeah, are you looking for raids that last, because we generally have an idea of how long our games should last, or portions of our games. When can the player safely stop worrying? Skyrim will always tell you, there's an enemy nearby, you can't sleep. I think Horizon Zero Dawn, that's another one that kind of stuck with me because have you?
I have seen videos, but
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful game, and it's an interesting kind of post-apocalypse thing. Because I always like those stories of what happens now, what happens next. But there are always like little alerts, or you'll know that something's not right. The sound is just like not right, and but the pacing of the game, you want to set it up early. Like you said, you can't just do check 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 check, because then that sets up the rhythm of the game. The rhythm of the game is check 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 check. But if you want an exploration game, then you need to show people how to explore a thing and then let them explore it. You need to teach people a mechanic and then have them practice that mechanic. And that was actually something with Apex Legends I got fed up with, because if any of you played Overstep with me at Game Dev Days, you know I'm not a first-person shooter. I can do sick tricks all day. Like, I will be flipping off of rails, all that, but there's just something where my eye and the trigger never actually meet up, and also I don't like shooting people. That's why I had to uninstall Apex Legends after the latest mass shooting in New Zealand, of all places. I was just like, I can't do it. I can't hunt down people anymore. This is something that morally no longer feels comfortable for me. That's not everybody's thing, but I'm traumatized and re-traumatized. I'm not interested in it. But figuring out, but the tutorial for that is like, you go in, you do the slide once, you do the shoot thing once, and then you as soon as you finish the tutorial, they kick you out of that, and you have to dive straight into the battle royale. And I'm like, can I have a place to play with people who don't care as much? Like, I mean, again, I can do sick tricks, but I'm not good at shooting people. I can stay alive forever just from pure avoidance, but you can't live off avoidance alone.
I think single player version of the game we made was quite cool.
Sorry?
There was a single player game we made, same studio.
Oh, they did?
What was it?
Single player game?
With mechs.
The Titanfall?
Yeah, Titanfall single player.
Okay.
Part.
Titanfall single player.
Yeah.
It's great. Because I love single player games, because I don't play well with others.
Have you played it?
No, I've not.
Yeah, it has like most of the mechanics from Apex.
Okay.
But with big as mechs and quite badass story.
Okay.
Titanfall 2 specifically.
Ah, yeah,
Okay.
Titanfall 2.
Titanfall 2. All right. I'll check it out. But I'm again wary on the whole shooting dynamics. I'd rather just pick flowers. I still have not chosen. Skyrim came out in 2011. It's been 7.5 years since it came out, and I have never joined a political faction. I only took up the dragon storyline about 4 years ago. Like, I didn't want to deal with that. The dragons were scary. I like when I could be picking flowers and like hunting bandits, and I was pissed off I couldn't join the tribe people, the not bandits, but they make you kill them all, like the worshippers of the old, with the Anyway, I like them. But yeah, so back to the question of pacing. Pacing starts from the get-go. Pacing starts from the marketing videos you put out. Like, you're giving people, like, constantly, the world that you are building is not just in the game. And you want that kind of internal consistency and coherence to make a story that works and make mechanics that reinforce the story. And because this is something with instructional design as well. Like, don't make something spin in Flash if it doesn't actually spin in Flash. Don't make people drag and drop if that has nothing to do, like if what they're actually doing is spinning a wheel, you know? You want all aspects of your story, your game to reinforce your story, and all aspects of your story to reinforce your game. And you can't always perfectly integrate everything, but the important thing is to think about it. You know, if you're stuck at a point, if you've got writer's block or coder's block, is that a thing? Dev's block? I don't know. You guys are fancier than me. Yeah, it gives you a place to kind of return to and say, what is the game I'm making? Who am I making it for? What do I want them to feel? Because it does come back to making people feel. That's what makes it immersive. That's what gets people into it. And yeah, it's everything. But
I have a point about that.
oh, please.
It might be too delicious of a trap to redesign
Yes.
everything. I read one game like 6 times.
Yeah.
So
How'd that go?
Bad. No, badly.
Well, but
But I
Did-
learned a lot.
I was gonna say, did
Yeah.
you learn? So
Yeah,
the
that
journey
was-
with that game wasn't about the character's journey or the player's journey. It was
Yeah.
about the developer's journey.
Yes, indeed.
Aww.
Related question about
Mhm.
the user or the player.
Mhm.
So speaking of the instructions design playbook,
Mhm.
as they say, failure is instructional.
Yes.
So you're setting them up to fail in a safe way. How do
Fail
you
in a safe way. Sorry, just fail in it. You're setting them up to fail in a safe
you
way.
fall on your bum but you don't die.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
how have you used it in interactive storytelling, for example?
Using the idea of failing in a safe way. Well, tutorials come to mind in the first place, of course, to set up a space where people can fail without dying. This is actually something I kind of talked with Marco about before when we were discussing what the topic of this talk would be, because a couple of the teams involved with APTGG both have a couple of them have games focused on death. And like we had this kind of discussion about like what is death in games? What is the relationship between death and the game? And sometimes death is the punishment.
Yeah,
You know?
I reload.
Yes.
So how do you get the story going so that the player wants to go on?
Right. Well, so that the question becomes like how do you use death? Is death a lesson or is death just something that happens? Is death the end, or is it just a restart point or a save point? When it comes though to making people like letting people fail and then carry on, I'm trying to think because I've made some very safe games where like you can't really you don't fail, you just don't get everything. You know, and it's kind of like the boring game. You know, you don't stop. Yeah. You can play a perfectly satisfactory and safe game, like along with Skyrim, and I like not playing dragons. You know.
What do you mean you didn't get all the guitars and stalker?
Yeah. And so I just you have to give players options. I think is the important thing, and this goes back to accessibility as well. I'm kind of an expert at Empires and Ruins right now because I've play tested it so much through so many different versions that but I still start off on easy mode every time I start on the new map. Just because for me personally, I like knowing what I'm getting into. Some people are like, nope, hardcore mode immediately, you know? How hard can I die? And that's how some people play. But I think it's about creating, understanding how you want your players to feel. Another one I've mentioned repeatedly, Source of Madness, you die, and you start back over, and it's hard to win. Like, I haven't finished the newest version of the beta they've got on itch, or Game Jolt, or whatever it's on. But it doesn't feel frustrating always. And same with like Overstep. It didn't feel frustrating to die there. It was just, you just reset and got back into it because it wasn't a real death, but that reinforced the world that they've built, where the world around that game and those mechanics you are literally just a person playing a robot in an arena as an esport. Like, that's your character in the game. Like, you're not, like, your robot is not your physical being. You don't actually lose. You just reset back to where you were, and you've got a limited time in it, and that's how the game works right now. They're changing it. It's still it's still evolving, But the demo that they brought to Game Dev Days was awesome for me in that way because I didn't feel like butthurt when I died because I suck at first-person shooters. And then I'd be sitting next to people who were really good at first-person shooters, and that was their focus. And they'd spend the whole time running around and shooting people, and they'd get 300 points. And I'd be doing sick tricks and have 4,000. And I was like, yes, like, guns are just a flourish. They're a thing you can use. And so I'm trying to convince them to like let me have just the Game Dev Days version because I know the guns and the weapons are gonna get more intense. But I just want I love Tony Hawk Pro Skater, man. Like let's just do sick tricks. I can't do it in real life, but I can. But yeah, I think it's kind of considering where how you want your player to interact with the game, how long your game is. And a lot of games with the leveling up it's really easy to level up in the early stages, and they give you the baseline like challenges like whether it's collect 10 wood or kill 20 boars. They kind of walk you into that, and of course like with World of Warcraft, like most of the game is grinding, so they get you real used to it. Well, I say most of the game unless you play it with like guilds and you do the whole thing and you play a different type of game. It's this.
Well, WoW was kind of different. World of Warcraft was quite different compared to other MMOs because other MMOs were really focused on grinding, like Lineage 2 and whatnot.
Okay.
But why World of Warcraft got popular was that they focused on community.
On the community. Okay.
Yeah, and how people interacted with it.
Well, and that's.
There's also a lot of world building around World of Warcraft, so I have a friend who played it, and sometimes late at night outside she just started talking about Warcraft and lore and everything behind that.
I like talking to people who are excited about things because I like talking about things when I'm excited. It's being here, but yeah, that's the kind of thing like. You can make a game that people play different ways. And so in the case of like slow tutorials, the ability to skip a tutorial and just jump straight in for the hardcore people who will figure it out as they go, or who know the rules of first-person shooters and will understand how the mechanics work. They'll know
or make extra awful tutorial for funny elements.
Wait, make
like
extra tutorials for funny levels?
Make really bad tutorial for humor.
Yes.
It's like in Yorkshire Gubbins, there's this, you have to get to know the commands.
Mm-hmm.
So the player character is instructed to learn verbs, and there's like, put this baby into an oven or something.
Oh
like
wow!
that.
Okay.
Yes,
Putting babies into the oven.
It's quite wacko.
Nice. Yeah. Well, that's yeah. Nick, I'm now. Are you thinking of an example, or are you planning?
Blood Dragon.
I've not played it. Tell me about it.
It was Far Cry 3.
Yeah,
Super Far Cry 3.
Yeah.
What was the bad tutorial?
It was kind of like it was a remake of a game in 80s style with like I don't know.
So was it bad?
It was really condescending, like the pure basics, like use WASD to move, and so you're moving, and then the character goes like, "Oh God damn, I know this."
Okay, got you. So the interaction throughout the tutorial kind of that kind of goes back to the what kind of spirit are you trying to? How do you want your player to feel? Is your player also feel like, fuck, I know this? The player and the character reflect one another there. That is condescending, but I appreciate it because, like, you don't always. But if it's in a series of a game where you know how to do the thing, yeah, I think. But I like the idea, and like part of the seed idea thing is the fact that different people will play games different ways, and people will not only play or break your game in ways you don't expect, they will play your game in ways you don't expect, and vice versa. And you may discover new, I was playtesting Dwarf Block or playing Dwarf Block at Game Dev Days, and I was like, oh wait, I can add more dwarfs here? Oh, give me lots of crowd surf, man! And you're standing over me like, why are you doing following this. So I'm like, no, it's great. And like I could have just stayed there like crowd surfing on endless dwarves. There's supposed to be combat and stuff. And I'm just like, no, but crowd surfing. Because I am a simple mind. But yeah, so people will play your games in ways you don't expect, but allowing for people to play your game in ways, like Source of Madness, you can play it one way. It's a side scroller, it's a thing. It has really cool physics and everything, but like there isn't any kind of community built in, and community matters. During my user experience thing, like the community experience is also something worth building, both in-game and outside of the game, whether it's the people controlling the wikis or commenting on the wikis, or if you're in Minecraft, like creating the Taj Mahal and showing it off to people, or I occasionally tell the story of this like really awful LAN party I went to, because I was really excited. I was like, yeah, LAN party, ready for this. And they're like, let's play Space Engineers. And everybody else was like, yeah. And I was like, I've never played that one. And they're like, all right, just spend $25, download this game, and then come see my spaceship. And I was like, how do I go see your spaceship? And they were like, well, you gotta build a spaceship. And I said, cool, how do I build a spaceship? And they said, well, you gotta dig up some ore. And I was like, well, cool, how do I dig up ore? And they're like, you gotta be on a different planet. And I was like, what? This is not for me, a LAN party is like you have a mission, you go together, there's a reason, you're in the same room so you can shout at each other. But for me, that was not the type of game, like, expectations versus reality. LAN party, I'm thinking raids, and I'm thinking quests, and I'm thinking, yeah, we're gonna take something down. And then we played Black Wake, and that was cool. But reality was, it's a building game. Like, I guess there is combat in it somewhere. Because like I'm not a first person shooter combat person, but I played countless hours of Void Ship because I play a lot of Estonian games, and with Void Ship I'm just like, kill everything, blow them up, spin, space debris, it's beautiful. But the first person shooter thing is what I can't get with Americans, you know, we're fucked. But yeah, so allowing room and just kind of being willing to let go of certain things, so let your players play their own game, form their own communities, tell their own stories. Because once you plant that seed, you've got to let it grow. And it's beyond your control. And I'm thinking about really bad tutorials though, and I'm like, what if you actually teach people to do the wrong things in the tutorial and they just repeatedly die, and that's how they learn to do the right things? And like the unreliable narrator, like what? Because I love the concept of the unreliable narrator, you know? I'm a lit major, amongst other things. But like,
that would be really interesting.
Right? Sorry. Yeah, where you set up a game where the player can't even trust the tutorial. So what would the game be? Like, what kind of game would you build where if that's how you want them to feel, you don't want them to trust the world in which they are? Like, they have to discover things. You have to encourage them enough. You have to let them fail safely. Yeah. You have to let them fail.
No.
What?
I think you need to set up like kind of from the beginning everything narrator says. You have to do opposite of it to succeed.
Not different.
Yeah, maybe. Well, because that's.
Would you press F to engage that red button for me? Oh, oops, you blew up. Oh,
Oopsie.
That reminds me of, it was called, I think, Stanley's Parable.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. It was with a narrator. The game had a narrator, and the player had a choice to always, do the opposite thing from the narrator. Like you'd be in a corridor, there'd be two doors, and the narrator says, and then Stanley went through the right door. And you go through the left door, and the narrator gets pissed off because that's not what's supposed to happen.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Stanley's Paradox.
Yes.
Parable.
Okay.
Yeah. If you haven't played it,
I haven't. That sounds right up my alley.
It's like I think game development goals.
Okay.
So it's like one game developer playing with himself practically.
Yeah. Isn't that what most game development? Yeah. Sorry.
So yeah, that's a good game.
That's
to play.
okay.
And it's not long game, so it's you can finish it quickly.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know, and I imagine that the narrative design, the actual writing of it would have been really intensive if you've got to write both this and that, and then does the narrative, I've got to stop thinking about this, because I'm like, does the narrative, does your relationship with the narrator adjust or moderate as you decide to do what they say or not say?
I think a little yes, because the more you like
Obey them.
straight from the narrator, I think the more the pissed off the narrator also
Yeah.
got. Like it was when in the end it was like to a point that where the narrator was really like signed off from the whole thing. Like, yeah, well, that should have happened, but Stanley never does anything what's supposed to happen, so who even cares anymore? I don't.
But can you reconnect with the narrator? Like, can you?
I don't remember actually.
Okay. I'm gonna have to play
I think
with
it's a possibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you have like many options
Yeah.
in one road,
I
and you have
understand.
like many different endings. So
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking about
you
them.
can practically break the world.
Yeah.
I haven't played it myself, but I have watched plenty of Let's Plays.
Okay, I'm gonna have to try this game because.
so yeah, it's kind of like Portal 2, I guess.
Yeah, well, so with the idea of binary choices, you either do what they say or you don't do what they say. But I like the idea of like the tutorial itself, like the on the game world, kind of setting up the atmosphere for the in the game world. Like you can't trust anybody, not even the tutorial. Like how do you get people to explore and play and well, I guess it would depend on how you write the tutorial. Like what? Yeah, why don't you try pressing this for me? Yeah, see what happens.
That can be like the narrator or the tutorial itself can be presented by another in-game character that turns
That's
out to
true.
be not having your best interest in their mind.
That
For
we may not be
example,
aware of.
GLaDOS from Portal Games.
Oh yes.
So if GLaDOS from Portal Games were to give me a tutorial, I would already be primed for not trusting her completely.
Exactly. But when you first played the game, not necessarily. Like I didn't play Portal the original, but I played Portal 2, so I didn't have any of the context of the first game. And I was like, oh cool. Like, yeah, I mean, I'm always creeped out by people whose voices I can mimic. But yeah, I almost dressed as GLaDOS one Halloween just to terrify people. Because it'd be fun.
How that's
Wouldn't it be terrifying? Sorry, I'm just looking at the lamp behind you going, you wonder how. But yeah, so
In the beginning of Undertale by
Mhm.
Naughty Fox, you meet this lovely little flower, and then it turns out he's evil.
nice.
But yeah,
But it is that kind of unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
Interesting. But is the rest of does that narrator reinforce the rest of Undertale's kind of storytelling and atmosphere? Is it like in a certain way, I guess? Because you have talking
yes,
plants.
I guess you learn from that the world isn't as you might expect.
Yeah, it's not all talking flowers and puppies.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, see, because these things matter. How you set up the tutorials, the types of characters you introduce, how you set up dialogue options, whether you allow binary choices or open world exploration.
so yeah, I'm in half hour.
Oh, okay, good.
I mean, it will
Yeah.
get like noisy in here because of alarm.
Oh, yeah, that would be a problem.
Yes, indeed, and I don't have a code.
Oh,
so
do
I
you
think
have permission to actually be here?
maybe.
Edit that part out. No,
Yes. And yeah, definitely, but I think in 20 minutes we should definitely go.
okay, I'm down. I'm peace.
Oh.
Sucks.
So yeah, but first I will try to do something that I totally forgot.
Oh, what's that?
Because for each event I have to make a sign-up sheet.
Oh, yeah, it's sign-up sheet time, y'all. I think this is entirely in keeping with the atmosphere of this talk, where I said it's going to be interactive, and it wasn't. I am an entirely unreliable narrator. You can choose to take the advice I've given, or you can say, wow, that person was great.
Yes, but last question.
Oh, yeah, questions? Chat? So you're welcome to you can stand up, there's no need to sit down all the time.
I have kind of a question. When you the process on a new project, for example, a game. What do you think is more important here? Like, you're empathizing the atmosphere, the story elements, characters, the game world, overworld, the transmedia part of it, and that. But what would you think in terms of game mechanics and versus like storytelling? Like, which is more important? Especially at the very beginning, where you're not really certain how your project will end up.
Right.
And what would be the backbone for it? Like,
Right.
It's more important to have like a really solid game mechanic in place than build a world on it, or maybe vice versa a little bit. You know, get an idea of the world and then design game mechanics that would complement this world.
Right.
Which way would be better in your?
Well, I think this is one of those situations where if anybody tells you there's one right way, they're wrong. But like my one right way would be, what makes you most excited? Start with that, because there's going to be enough boring slog to get through later. Like, if you want to actually start a new project, start with what makes you excited. Because if you start with something like, okay, I'm setting out to, and I mean, like, writing sonnets gets me excited because I'm like, yes, I've got a constraint. I'm going to go Shakespearean, A, B, C, D, C, D, yeah. So I get excited about that, and then I can fit things into it because I'm constantly processing all sorts of things. So I was like, hey, I could write a sestina about my high school math teacher. Cool. I can write a haiku about Frogger. It was more than a haiku, and I was proud of it. Yeah, I think always start with what you care about, because you're the first user. Like, that's like what makes you excited to do this. That's what's going to keep you doing it, and build your atmosphere about what makes you excited. Because if you're excited about the mechanics, what brings that back around? You know, how do you reinforce the world through your mechanics? What in the world reinforces those mechanics? And so same with if you've got a really cool story. I mapped out. I was really excited about this game project that I thought I had the mechanics for, but I didn't. And so I put it on the shelf, and that was fine. And then I got interested in something that made me excited and reconnected me with that project. But yeah, just get excited always. Even whether it's about Warcraft and like you're like it's 3 a.m. and you're drunk and you're talking about Warcraft with all your buddies. Like, yeah, I think that's always a great starting point. How you going over there?
I think I will just give up.
Well, we can just fill it out on paper or directly on the computer.
No, I will get some.
Can you write it on random paper? Does it have to be this exact printout?
Yes.
Our names into it though.
I need all the logos.
Okay.
We can type our names into it and we can print it later. Signatures. Everyone know your PIN too? No, just kidding. That was my morning, hanging out at Police and Border Guard, getting my pins renewed. Because I forgot how many numbers they were. I changed them. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to remember this one, but I didn't remember the third one. And I kept putting in the area code on one of them, and that wasn't necessary. Yeah, because you have your PIN 1, your PIN 2, and the PUC code. Yeah, or PUC, or however you pronounce it. P-U-K.
You need that when you have already.
Yeah, when you've already screwed things up. Yeah. I was like, oh, I'm going to use my childhood phone number as a thing. That's great. I kept putting in the area code, and I was like, or not the area code, this country code. And I was like, I don't need the country. Whoops! Only realized that 5 attempts later. But any more questions? Any more dance parties? I don't know. I occasionally squirm. It's a thing. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for being here with us. I hope this was useful in some way, even if just to have something to laugh at, because I'm funny looking. So bye.